Something is happening inside Drake's empire right now that nobody in the mainstream media wants to say out loud. The numbers are bleeding. The streams are crashing. The deals are slipping through his fingers like sand. And the strangest part of this entire collapse isn't even the collapse itself. It's the reaction. Because while the most commercially dominant rapper of the last decade watches his own kingdom shake beneath his feet, his army of loyal defenders has decided that the man responsible for this entire downfall is somehow Kendrick Lamar. A man who hasn't spoken his name in months. A man who isn't even in the room. And that single detail tells you everything you need to know about what's really going on here. Welcome back, family. It's your boy, and what I'm about to walk you through tonight is one of the wildest cases of public denial we've ever witnessed in modern hip-hop. Because the reports are now confirmed. Drake's combined first-week album sales have officially crashed to record lows. Not low, record lows. The kind of number that, just 2 years ago, would have been unthinkable to even whisper about a man who once treated the Billboard charts like his personal living room. And on top of that, DJ Akademiks just dropped a clip claiming that Drake's own arrogance cost him an $800 million contract during the middle of his beef with Kendrick. $800 million. Gone. Vanished. Evaporated into thin air because a man at the top of the mountain decided he was untouchable. So before we dive any deeper into this storm, do me one favor. If you want the unfiltered breakdowns nobody else is brave enough to give you, smash that subscribe button and join the family at my channel. Because, trust me, the deeper we go tonight, the crazier the story gets. Now, let's set the stage properly, because context is everything. For years, Drake operated like a man who couldn't lose. Every single he dropped became a chart topper. Every feature he jumped on turned to platinum. Every tour sold out before the posters even hit the wall. He wasn't just a rapper. He was a machine. A franchise, a commercial weapon disguised as a human being. And in that environment of constant winning, something dangerous started to grow in the background. Something quiet, something invisible to the people closest to him. It was the belief that he could never be touched. The belief that his throne was eternal. The belief that no one, no matter how skilled or respected, could ever shake him from the position he had built. And that belief, that one fatal assumption, is exactly what set the trap he would later walk straight into. Because here's the brutal truth nobody in his camp wants to admit. Drake didn't fall because of Kendrick Lamar. Drake fell because of Drake. Kendrick simply held up the mirror. He didn't push him off the cliff. He just made the cliff visible. And once Drake saw that cliff, instead of stepping back, instead of regrouping, instead of taking the loss with grace and rebuilding quietly the way every great artist has done before him, he doubled down. And then he tripled down. He kept swinging in the dark, kept releasing music dripping with subliminals, kept naming songs after lyrics from the man he claimed he didn't even listen to. And the audience, the same audience that once worshipped him, started doing something nobody in his orbit predicted. They started to look away. That's the part that should send chills down the spine of every label executive watching this unfold. Because losing a battle isn't fatal in hip-hop. Plenty of legends have lost battles and rebuilt their careers stronger than before. Jay-Z lost rounds. Nas lost rounds. Even the greatest names in the genre have stumbled. But what's fatal, what's truly fatal, is what comes after the loss. The grace, or the lack of it. The silence, or the bitterness. The reinvention, or the repetition. And Drake chose the worst possible path. He chose to keep poking the wound. He chose to keep reminding everyone that he was hurt. And every single time he opened his mouth about it, his stock dipped a little lower, his fans got a little quieter, and his empire creaked a little louder under the weight of his own ego. Now let's talk about the numbers, because the numbers are screaming a story even his most loyal defenders can't drown out. Day 2 of his recent release, Drake suffered the largest streaming drop-off any major rapper has experienced this entire calendar year. Read that again. The largest. Not a small dip. Not a normal cooldown. The biggest collapse in retention any top-tier artist has seen in 12 months. And what does that mean in plain language? It means people pressed play out of curiosity. They wanted to know if he was going to take another shot. They wanted to see if he had something fresh to say. And then, somewhere around track 3 or 4, they quietly closed the app. They didn't even finish the project. They voted with their thumbs. They voted with their silence. And silence, in the music industry, is louder than any diss track ever recorded. And here's where it gets even more uncomfortable for his camp. Because the same people who are now waving the numbers flag, the same people who are now screaming about streams and first-week sales and chart positions, are the exact same people who brought numbers into this conversation in the first place. Drake's fans were the ones who built the entire identity of their fandom around metrics. Numbers became their religion. Numbers became their proof. Numbers became the only thing they could fall back on when the lyrical conversation slipped away from them. And now, suddenly, when those very same numbers start telling a story they don't like, they want to change the subject. They want to talk about narratives. They want to talk about culture. They want to talk about anything except the scoreboard they themselves designed. That's not loyalty. That's denial dressed up in a designer jacket. This is the part of the story most commentators are too scared to say out loud. When you build your entire artistic identity around being the biggest, the best-selling, the most streamed, the most commercial, you have nowhere to hide when those numbers slip. You can't suddenly pivot and say the music was the point. You can't suddenly claim it was about the art. You spent a decade telling the world that the scoreboard was everything. And now the scoreboard is whispering something you don't want to hear. That's not Kendrick's fault. That's not the fans' fault. That's not the algorithm's fault. That's the consequence of building a kingdom on sand and pretending it was carved from stone. And while we're stripping away the layers here, let's talk about something the average viewer might not even realize is happening behind the scenes. Let's talk about that $800 million deal. According to the clip Akademiks broke down recently, Drake was sitting at the negotiating table for a contract that would have changed his family's life for 3 generations. $800 million on the line. The kind of money that buys islands. The kind of money that builds dynasties. The kind of money where every single move you make should be calculated, careful, and surgical. And right in the middle of that delicate dance, the man decided to walk into a rap battle he wasn't fully prepared for, against an opponent who had been studying him like a thesis paper. While his own legal team was reportedly aware that forces inside the industry were quietly working against him. That's not confidence. That's recklessness. And recklessness in a boardroom costs more than recklessness in a recording booth ever could. Think about that for a second. Really sit with it. You're holding nearly $1 billion in your hand. The pen is on the table. The contract is being drafted. And you choose to gamble that entire fortune on whether or not you can out-rap a man who has been preparing for this exact moment for over a decade. That's not a strategic decision. That's a man so drunk on his own legend that he forgot legends can bleed. And when the dust settled, when the smoke cleared, when the verdict came in from the streets, the radio, the playlists, and the algorithms, the cost wasn't just a bruised ego. The cost was generational money walking out the door and never coming back. And now, suddenly, his camp is floating new numbers. 5 billion. 10 billion. Wild figures that keep climbing higher every week, like a fisherman whose catch keeps growing every time he tells the story. But ask yourself a simple question. If his stock truly fell, if his own admission was that the beef damaged his market value, how does the price tag magically multiply afterward? Numbers don't work that way. Markets don't work that way. Valuations don't work that way. When a brand takes a hit, the price comes down, not up. So either the original 800 million figure was real, and the new numbers are fantasy, or the new numbers are real, and we're being told a completely different story than what actually happened. Either way, somebody is lying. And in this business, the lies always eventually catch up with the ledger. Before we go any further into this rabbit hole, real quick, I want to say something to every single one of you still watching right now. The fact that you're here, the fact that you're locked in, the fact that you're not letting the mainstream narrative shape your view of what's really happening, that means everything to me. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button on my channel and ring the bell, because the breakdowns are about to get even sharper from this point forward. We're not even at the halfway mark yet, and the deeper layers of this story are honestly more shocking than the surface. So stay locked in, family. Let's keep going. Now, let's talk about the fan base, because this part is fascinating from a psychological standpoint. There is something almost cult-like about the way Drake's most loyal defenders behave online. And I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying that because the patterns are textbook. Whenever any piece of negative information surfaces about their favorite artist, the response isn't reflection. The response isn't honesty. The response is deflection, redirection, and immediate blame transfer. And the favorite target of that blame transfer, no matter what the actual topic is, has become Kendrick Lamar. The man could be facing a tax audit, and they'd find a way to blame Kendrick. The hair could be thinning, and they'd find a way to blame Kendrick. The clouds could be gray over Toronto, and somebody, somewhere, would be typing out a paragraph about how it's secretly Compton's fault. And I want you to really think about what that level of obsession reveals. Because here's the irony, so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. The fans who claim to hate Kendrick Lamar talk about Kendrick Lamar more than Kendrick Lamar talks about himself. Their entire emotional ecosystem revolves around a man they pretend not to care about. Their conversations begin with him. Their conversations end with him. Their defenses, their attacks, their explanations, their justifications, every single one of them somehow circles back to the same name they swear means nothing. That's not hatred. That's haunting. And when a ghost lives rent-free in your timeline for over a year, you have to start asking yourself who really won this thing. Meanwhile, Kendrick has been doing something so simple, so devastatingly effective, that most people haven't even noticed it. He's been silent. He's been working. He's been letting the silence do the talking for him. And there are now rumors swirling that he has a brand new album finished, with poly-market odds climbing to nearly 70% that we get a fresh project from him before the year is over. 70%. That's not speculation. That's the market itself betting on a man who hasn't said a single word publicly in months. And the contrast between the two camps couldn't be more dramatic. One side is screaming into the void about numbers and narratives. The other side is quietly preparing what could be another cultural earthquake. That's what real leverage looks like. That's what real power sounds like. It sounds like absolutely nothing until the moment it doesn't. And now let's talk about the streaming party situation, because this is where things get genuinely strange. Multiple reports have surfaced about coordinated efforts by Drake's most dedicated fans to organize listening sessions designed specifically to inflate his stream counts. They've been begging other fan bases, including the Barbs, to throw their weight behind his numbers. They've been openly strategizing in fan group chats and public forums. And here's the question nobody on that side wants to answer honestly. If the music is truly that good, if the project is genuinely that powerful, if the audience really loves it the way they claim they do, why does it need a coordinated rescue effort? Great art doesn't need a coalition government to stay afloat. Great art floats on its own. The fact that they have to assemble teams to manufacture a baseline of success tells you everything about the actual organic demand sitting underneath the surface. And let's not skip past the most uncomfortable detail of all. The same fan base that mocked Kendrick supporters for allegedly using bots is now being caught doing the exact thing they spent months accusing the other side of. That's not a coincidence. That's projection. In psychology, projection is when you accuse other people of doing the very thing you are secretly doing yourself, because admitting it about yourself is too painful. And the louder the accusation, the deeper the guilt usually runs. So every time you hear a Drake stan scream about bots, just remember, the people screaming the loudest about the fire are often the same people holding the matches. Now I want to address something that I've been seeing repeated over and over again across social media. The claim that Drake is some kind of brilliant A&R, some legendary star maker, some kingmaker who built half of modern rap with his own bare hands. Let's actually look at the receipts on that claim, because the mythology and the reality are two completely different stories. When you examine OVO as a label, when you actually look at the artists they've supposedly developed, the track record is far thinner than the marketing suggests. The pattern isn't that Drake discovers raw talent and molds them into superstars. The pattern is that Drake jumps on records by artists who already have buzz, already have momentum, already have a heartbeat in the streets. And then, after the song blows up, the narrative gets rewritten to suggest he was the one who put them on. That's not mentorship. That's marketing. Take the Migos situation, for example. People love to claim Drake made the Migos. But the Migos were already a movement before that record ever existed. They had the Atlanta streets in a chokehold. They had a sound that was reshaping the entire genre. Drake hopping on the song was a smart business decision for everyone involved, but the idea that he created their stardom from nothing is revisionist history of the highest order. And the more recent example with Molly Santana is even more telling. There are reports that Drake didn't even know who she was until his own son had to brief him on her. His own son. That's not the resume of a master A&R with his finger on the pulse of culture. That's the resume of a man whose finger has been off the pulse for longer than his fans would like to admit. And then there's the most damning detail of all when it comes to the so-called genius A&R narrative. Drake brought Kendrick Lamar on tour. Drake brought A$AP Rocky on tour. Drake has been associated with countless culturally significant artists over the years. And in almost every single one of those situations, the benefit was mutual at best and tilted in Drake's favor at worst. Standing next to the hottest names in the genre when you're already at the top doesn't make you a kingmaker. It makes you a smart businessman who understands the power of association. There's a massive difference between building someone up and standing next to them when they're already shining. One requires vision. The other just requires a calendar and an open slot. Now let's talk about something else that's been bothering me throughout this entire saga. The tour conversation. Because his fans have been pushing this narrative for months that Drake is about to embark on some massive stadium run, some world-conquering tour that will reset the entire industry. And yet, when you actually examine the data, when you actually look at the numbers, when you actually compare it to what other top-tier artists are doing in the same space, the conversation falls apart almost immediately. 11,000 pure sales in a first week, the kind of number we're now seeing, is not the foundation for a stadium tour. Stadium tours are built on tens of millions of devoted fans willing to spend significant money for an experience. And when your album can barely move 5 digits in pure sales, the stadium math simply doesn't work, no matter how many tweets get sent in capital letters. And here's something most people don't realize about the touring world. The reason a lot of major rappers don't perform in markets like Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, or certain parts of Europe isn't because they don't want to. It's because they can't sell those venues out. I personally spoke with promoters in Mexico when I went down to see Kendrick perform there, and they were extremely candid about the situation. They told me that they often don't even bother booking certain top-tier American rappers because the demand simply isn't there. They can only fill 30 to 40% of the seats, which is humiliating for an artist of that caliber. So they avoid the embarrassment by avoiding the booking. Kendrick going down there and selling those venues out wasn't a small accomplishment. It was a statement. It was proof of an international fan base that goes deeper than playlist placements and algorithmic streams. And this is where the contrast between the two artists becomes the most revealing. One artist can fill stadiums in countries where most of his peers wouldn't even attempt a show. The other artist is now hoping that a bundled deal involving older albums will be enough to justify a valuation that keeps climbing higher every time his fans tweet about it. That's not a small difference. That's a generational difference. That's the difference between a touring legacy and a streaming product. And in the long run, touring legacies always outlast streaming products. Always. Because algorithms change, playlists rotate, but a sold-out arena in a foreign country is forever. Let's take a quick breath here, because I know this is a lot of information to process. And honestly, this is exactly the kind of breakdown the mainstream commentary channels are too scared to give you because they're worried about backlash, they're worried about losing access, they're worried about getting blacklisted by certain camps. But that's not how we move at my channel. We tell the story exactly the way it unfolds, without filters, without favorites, without fear. If that's the kind of energy you want in your timeline, hit the like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's coming next. Because what's coming next is the part of this story that's going to make a lot of people very uncomfortable. Now let's go back to the alleged New Deal, the Sony situation, the rumored partnership that's been bouncing around the internet like a rumor with nowhere to land. The narrative being pushed is that Drake is about to ink some massive new arrangement that will dwarf anything he's ever done before. Insiders are claiming the deal is real. Influencers are claiming they know the people putting it together. And the comment sections are already filled with fans declaring victory before a single contract has been signed. But here's the thing about deals in this industry. Until the artist himself stands at a microphone and says the words out loud, None of it is real. Not the leaks. Not the whispers. Not the screenshots. Not the supposed insider scoops. Music industry deals collapse all the time, sometimes at the very last second, and the wreckage is usually buried under PR statements about creative differences. And here's the bigger problem with the entire premise. If Drake is truly getting billions of dollars for this hypothetical new deal, the question becomes, what is he actually selling? Because for years he has built his public identity around being the artist who fights for ownership, who refuses to be controlled by the system, who demands the rights to his own work. That has been his entire moral high ground. So if he's now signing away rights, signing away publishing, signing away masters, signing away anything substantial to secure that billion-dollar bag, the contradiction becomes almost impossible to defend. You can't spend a decade telling the world you stand for artist ownership and then sell that exact principle for the right price. Well, you can. But you can't expect the audience to keep clapping when you do. And let's not forget the underlying business reality of all of this. The reason any new deal would even theoretically be valuable is because of the strength of his older catalog. The albums from his peak years. The records that built him into the global force he became. Those are the assets that hold the real value. The newer music, the more recent projects, the material released after the beef, simply does not carry the same commercial weight. So even if a massive deal materializes, the leverage is coming from the past, not the present. And that's a sobering truth for any artist to face. The present is supposed to build on the past, not lean on it. This brings us to maybe the most important point of this entire conversation. The conversation itself has fundamentally shifted. 2 years ago, the conversation around Drake was about the music, the melodies, the bars, the vibes, the cultural moments his songs created. Now the conversation is about numbers, deals, streams, charts, and damage control. Notice the shift. Notice what's missing. Nobody is talking about the songs themselves with the same passion they used to. Even his most ardent defenders aren't quoting his recent lyrics, aren't replaying his recent hooks, aren't celebrating his recent musical choices. They're celebrating numbers. They're defending positions. They're managing perception. And when a conversation about an artist becomes purely about the business of being that artist, the art itself has already lost the war. And that's the deeper tragedy hiding inside this entire story. Drake didn't just lose a rap battle. Drake lost the narrative around his own art. The thing that made him special in the first place, the thing that made the world fall in love with him over 15 years ago, was the music, the vulnerability, the melodies, the way he could capture a feeling and bottle it into a 3-minute song that defined an entire summer. That was the magic. That was the spark. And somewhere between the battle and the aftermath, between the ego and the algorithm, between the streaming parties and the corporate negotiations, that spark started to fade. The art got replaced with the apparatus. The melodies got replaced with the metrics. And the man who once made the world feel something became the man whose fans now argue about how many people pressed play before pressing skip. Now I want to be fair here, because this isn't about disrespect. Drake's legacy is locked in. His impact is undeniable. The records he has set will likely never be broken by anyone in his generation. He has shaped pop culture for a decade and a half, and that contribution deserves recognition no matter how this current chapter ends. But legacy and momentum are two different things. Legacy is what you've already done. Momentum is what you're doing right now. And right now, the momentum is moving in a direction that should concern anyone in his camp who actually cares about his long-term health as an artist. Because the way you exit a difficult chapter often defines you more than the chapter itself. The greats know when to step back. The greats know when to let the storm pass. The greats know that the worst thing you can do in the middle of a public bruising is to keep flexing the bruise. Real reinvention requires silence. Real recovery requires patience. Real return requires humility. And so far, none of those 3 ingredients have shown up in Drake's response. He has been loud. He has been impatient. He has been defiant. And every single one of those choices has fed the fire he claims he wants to extinguish. You cannot scream the storm away. You can only outlast it. And that's why this story matters far beyond the boundaries of one rapper, one beef, one album, or one season of bad headlines. This story is a case study in what happens when ego writes checks that reality cannot cash. It's a case study in what happens when you confuse your own popularity for your own permanence. It's a case study in what happens when you forget that the audience is the most ruthless judge in the entire room, and the moment they sense you've lost faith in yourself, they lose faith in you too. There's an old saying in the music business that the fall always lasts longer than the climb. And from where we're standing right now, watching this story unfold in real time, that saying has rarely felt more accurate. So, as we approach the end of tonight's breakdown, I want to leave you with one final thought to sit with. Because this is the part of the story nobody else seems willing to address. The real loser in this entire saga isn't Drake. It isn't Kendrick. It isn't even the labels or the lawyers or the streaming services tracking every micro shift in audience behavior. The real loser is the version of hip-hop where artistry mattered more than analytics. The version where a great album could heal a wounded reputation. The version where the music itself was the answer to every question. We have drifted so far from that version of the culture that an entire fan base now uses scoreboards as their primary form of love. And that, more than any one album flop or any one missed deal, is the quiet tragedy hiding underneath all the noise. Drake will survive this chapter. Of course he will. He has the resources, the connections, the talent, and the brand power to weather almost any storm. But the question isn't whether he survives. The question is what version of him emerges on the other side. Will it be the artist who learned, who adapted, who returned with humility and hunger? Or will it be the executive who doubled down, who outsourced his art to his accountants, who became more concerned with valuations than with verses? Only time will tell. And the next 12 months are going to reveal far more about his true character than the last 12 ever did. So, family, that's where we leave it tonight. The numbers are speaking. The deals are shifting. The narratives are crumbling. And somewhere in Compton, a man who once delivered the most surgical victory in modern rap history is sitting in complete silence, letting the entire world arrive at the same conclusion he reached a long time ago. There's a lesson in that silence for every single one of us watching. Sometimes the loudest statement you can make is to say absolutely nothing at all and let the universe handle the receipts on your behalf. If this breakdown hit you the way I hope it did, if you felt the weight of every layer we peeled back tonight, do me one final favor before you click away. Subscribe to my channel. Hit that bell so you never miss a drop. Drop a comment with your honest prediction for Drake's first week numbers, and let me know whether you think Kendrick will release that rumored album before the year ends. Because something tells me we are nowhere near the final chapter of this saga. Something tells me the biggest twist is still hiding around the corner. And when that twist arrives, you already know exactly where to be. Right here, with the family, at my channel. Until then, stay sharp, stay curious, and never let anyone sell you a narrative the numbers refuse to back up. I'll see you in the next one.